Ooh, welcome on into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and it is time for the Week 15 wide receiver rankings. Everything with the website should be fixed, so there should be no confusion there anymore. Links down in the description will be active as of some point on Wednesday. Usually I'm able to do it by mid-afternoon, early afternoon actually even. A lot of the times I forget until a little bit later into the afternoon. So for sure, by the time you get into the afternoon, later afternoon, early evening of Wednesday, all of those links should be active. And the running backs video, as a reminder, will come out tomorrow morning, and then the quarterbacks, actually this evening, the running backs video. So by that point in time, those links will all be workable. And then the quarterbacks and tight ends video comes out tomorrow morning. And then, of course, I go live in the evening on Thursday, 1 hour, 45 minutes prior to kickoff, as well as Saturday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and all these are Eastern Standard Time, of course. And then Sunday morning, prior to kickoff, 2.5 hours or so prior to kickoff, I'll be available for all of your start-sit types of questions. Congratulations on those who made it to their playoffs, and for those still fighting for a playoff spot, let's go, let's get it. I think this is a really good week for wide receivers, so I actually don't have like a whole lot to nitpick on. It was pretty tough for me to find my fades this week. If you're not familiar, I do loves and fades. I'll have them highlighted in green and red in this video. Of course, the loves will be green, the fades will be in red, the players will be highlighted. We'll get right back to that. You can see otherwise, though, I do have projections on the screen, and these are going to be red to blue. Red is good, blue is bad for everything else other than when I have these highlighted players. And if you like a more simpler outlook, once you get onto the website, you can just click on this rankings thing, and then there's no projections, it's just the rankings. Speaking of getting to the loves and the fades, last week, I always like to recap how I did. Well, last week, I recapped how I did 2 weeks ago, and I just did a very brief recap, because 2 weeks ago, I did really, really well, and I didn't get to give myself much credit for it. Well, you know what? Last week, my fades and my loves, I did really, really bad, and I'm not going to give myself much credit for it. There we go. You know, I've got it covered. Just know it was a bad week for my loves and fades in general. One of the worst weeks. That'll happen a couple of times a season, once or twice. So we got that out of our system. Hopefully it should be much better this week with my fades and my loves. And I feel like I'm leaving something on the table here. I probably am, but I think we could just get right on into this week's rankings. My first tier up there goes from my wide receiver 1 through my wide receiver 5. I added Amon-Ra St. Brown, actually, in the end. I was about to stop at wide receiver 4 there. But this tier starts with Ja'Marr Chase, followed by Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And the reason that I added Amon-Ra St. Brown at the back end here has a lot to do with how Puka Nacua was able to beat Buffalo last week. That's kind of the recipe. These shorter ADOT type of guys kind of beat them underneath because Buffalo's willing to allow a lot of the underneath stuff. And there's a little bit of a hint as to who I might be fading later on in the rankings, because I might have concern about their chances of going over the top against a Buffalo defense that does a really good job of creating a shell and forcing teams to take this, the underneath step. So, with that being said, outside of that, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, this is my must-start tier. I don't think there's too much of a surprise for that, given the player and or the matchup for these guys. Let's get into my second tier, and this is going to be one of those huge tiers. I actually only have 4 tiers in this video. I have a total of 86 wide receivers ranked, so please, go check out the rest of the rankings. But I'm also going to say, guys, I said I like the wide receiver rankings a lot, but it's going to be a matter of getting them right? Getting which guy should be playing above another guy. So I really ask for your help, your advice in the comments. Who do you think I should have 1 or 2 spots higher? And definitely, please include some sort of reasoning with those kinds of comments. It's always appreciated. Either way, I will think about it, look into it. And throughout the week, when we're going live, these wide receivers might be a little bit fluid in terms of just like within a couple of spots, because once again, I really like a lot of them a lot this week. I think there's a lot of great matchups. It's been a rare thing this season. It's like the year of the running back, and this week we're going to kind of be able to change that for once and get a week of the wide receivers. I went a little bit too low there, but you can see my next tier is a big tier, as said, of the wide receivers. You've got my wide receiver 6, A.J. Brown, going all the way down to wide receiver 19, and you can kind of see it in the projections here. A little bit lower of a floor than what we were seeing with those top 5-ish. I'm not going to say Brown kind of starting that, but I explained why I felt like he deserved to be in that tier instead this week, despite it being a tougher matchup. But you can see that that floor has kind of gone down a little ways on average here, and for the most part, the ceiling's gone down a little bit. So you see how that works with the projections, kind of aligning with the rankings there. Overall, of course, there's little instances that are going to be out of whack, like Tyreek Hill here, looking like a lower floor and a lower ceiling generally there. But such a good matchup against Houston. So let's finish this tier. We got A.J. Brown as my wide receiver 6, followed by Jauan Jennings, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, CeeDee Lamb, Drake London, T. Higgins, Jackson Smith, and Jigba taking the lead over DK Metcalf. Finally, we've been looking at that for the last couple of weeks. When would that happen? It's been on target to happen here, and it is going to happen this week. I think at this point, I would trust JSN more. That's going to be followed by my wide receiver 15, Malik Neighbors, Mike Evans, 16, Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson, 17 and 18. Still have them back-to-back. Still have Adams one spot ahead of Wilson. But as you can see, it's very close. It's really an argument about the ceiling for Adams compared to the higher floor for Garrett Wilson based on their time in New York with Aaron Rodgers. And then Jerry Jeudy going up against Kansas City. So I did spend a lot of time this week and have been in recent weeks making sure to update the projections for specific differences in circumstances. Throughout the season, circumstances change. I try to look for the sample set of the most, relevant circumstance to the current circumstance that these players are in. So that required going in for a guy like Davante Adams and ignoring those first, I think it's like 6 weeks of the season, and just going from week 7 or 8, whatever, on forward for the projections. So a lot of that happening in these projections. So they are, they have been manually updated quite a bit, a decent amount here, but nothing too crazy, and only, based on what's happened throughout the year. We do see a couple of my loves here. We're going to get a pair of loves, just going to be the New York Jets wide receivers down there. So there's still one more love to go. But this week, for my first love of the week at wide receiver 7, we have Jauan Jennings, and I'm back on board with my guy after I did fade him last week. It wasn't like a strong fade or anything. There was just, a few concerns surrounding that I was less high on him last week than I have been every other week that we've been excited to some extent about Jauan Jennings. And yeah, we're back to being excited. He's just, you can see with the projections, he belongs in a different tier based on what he's done when either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk have missed games, which is, still the situation for Jauan Jennings. He's just been a stud. The only time he's faltered any was during that snow game. This feels similar to me to the Buffalo versus Los Angeles matchup from last week, except that San Francisco's defense is even worse than Buffalo's defense. So I just feel like we got another possible shootout here between San Francisco and the Rams coming in, another high-scoring game. Very much possible between these two teams. And Jauan Jennings should feast, if that is the case, against not a terrible Los Angeles Rams secondary, but definitely one that can be had by, better quarterback wide receiver combinations. And that's going to bring us to this second tier. Before I just make sure there's nothing too much to comment on with the other receivers, Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson, the New York Jets wide receivers. Just 2 weeks ago, the opponent here for New York, Jacksonville, was the best matchup for wide receivers. Then they faced Houston and Tennessee, and oddly, both of those teams decided that for some reason they didn't want to attack this secondary, and they didn't, and now Jacksonville slipped a little bit, but they're still a top 5 matchup on the season, and I still think one of the worst secondaries in the league. And Adams, Garrett Wilson should find plenty of room in an offense, the New York Jets offense here, who seem to have found themselves the aerial attack that they've been looking for all season long in recent weeks, especially in this last week. We'll see if they can't keep that going once again in a really good matchup against Jacksonville. Garrett Wilson, your floor guy, Davante Adams, your ceiling guy. Both of them, project quite nicely. And other than that, in this tier, Cooper Kupp, San Francisco, talked about that game. A.J. Brown, a little bit nervous potentially for one of those Philly receivers at least. I don't know. That's a tough situation, but how do you sit A.J. Brown? It's just so tough. And then Tyreek Hill going up against Houston. Like I said, the projections are a little bit lower, but Houston's defense has been struggling, and Miami's offense has found itself. And we're just coming off of Tyreek finally doing something. So I think the ECR number's really high. I'm close to that as well. You got to get excited about Tyreek Hill this week. Then Terry McLaurin going up against New Orleans. He gets it done no matter what. Yes, he does have one of the lowest floors here in this tier, but also he always finds a way, one way or another. So against New Orleans, I'm expecting him to find a way to get you good enough fantasy points yet again. CeeDee Lamb against Carolina, obviously not too much of a challenge there in Carolina, so I still love the floor. He's actually has a higher floor. I updated the projections, and I see the projections from his season-long stats, so his floor is actually higher now with Cooper Rush than it was with Dak Prescott. The ceiling's down, not scoring as many touchdowns. That was anticipated, but luckily he's been getting targeted even more. So you got to love that. Drake London against Las Vegas. What's wrong with that? T. Higgins, he falters last week. We had to know that this was probably going to come eventually. He's been really good this season, usually in Cincinnati. With both him and Jamar Chase, there are weeks that T. Higgins doesn't come through for you. And so this is definitely one of those weeks where that could happen, but it's also one where, let's anticipate a return to form for T. Higgins. Definitely touchdown, I think, quite likely in this game. JSN, like I said, we've been liking that. Green Bay's secondary can be had. I don't think they specifically have anybody who matches up incredibly well against JSN. So I think JSN's in line for a good week. Malik Neighbors going up against Baltimore. That matchup has to get you a little bit excited, and he's still had a floor. It hasn't remained quite as nice as CeeDee Lamb's, but that's not a huge surprise there. Mike Evans against Los Angeles Chargers. This is one where ECR and him's quite a bit higher. Kind of could have faded him, but I didn't quite want to fade him. Going up against the Chargers, a below average matchup. Definitely a limiting matchup, and that's where you're seeing this floor for a guy who's already boom or bust is quite low in this tier, and I do have some concern about that floor being the reality yet again this week. It's been unfortunate as of late, but I'm not too scared of anything there. And then Jerry Jeudy, we've all seen how nice that has been in Kansas City's secondary. I just found out Jalen Johnston, it's not coming back anytime soon here, I don't believe, for fantasy purposes. So that secondary Kansas City should continue to be leaky. Let's go on to this next tier. It's a small tier. Wide receivers 20, 21, 22, and 23. Courtland Sutton, Ladd McConkey, Calvin Ridley, and Brian Thomas Jr. So you can kind of see, once again, this tier, the floor steadily drops just a little bit. The ceiling also has dropped just a little bit here compared to the average. Not a big jump down, but this is kind of my transitional tier for these guys. Courtland Sutton against Indianapolis. We can trust Courtland Sutton. Everything's nice there. The ceiling isn't incredibly high, but the floor is definitely safe with Courtland. Ladd McConkey, assuming he's healthy. Really excited about that kind of matchup against Tampa Bay. I always like my wide receivers against Tampa Bay, so hopefully he's healthy again. Calvin Ridley, once again, it's a great matchup. We're going to try to attack it again, and these are the projections with just him, with no DeAndre Hopkins, and he's been quite good. He does tend to disappoint sometimes, though. So hopefully he won't disappoint, but that's, we'd be even higher on him if he'd just be a little bit more dominant as of late. In some of these good matchups. And then Brian Thomas Jr., New York Jets defense has been quite leaky, so I guess we're not as afraid of that as we would be. And Brian Thomas Jr. has been finding a way with Mac Jones in at quarterback. Yeah, he's been finding a way somehow, some way. The floor is definitely scary, not the best, but given what's been happening and given what's happened on this side of the defense for the New York Jets here, he just barely makes it into this little transitional tier for me where I would play him ahead of these guys, I think. It's tough. I don't know if this one will stay for sure. So let's get all the way down to my wide receiver 36. Once again, I got an 86, another 50 wide receivers ranked, and a couple not ranked that we'll cover as well. So you can check those all out up on the website, www.theff4age.com. Links down in the description as well to the rankings. That's going to bring us on to my second love of the week here at my wide receiver 24 in DeAndre Hopkins going up against Cleveland. And I think that DeAndre Hopkins has been getting underappreciated as the fantasy asset that he has been in Kansas City. He's not blowing the world up here and shocking us all, but he's been steady with the following scores ever since his second game in Kansas City, because his first game, he only got like 40% of the snap share or something like that. So I think it was less than that, actually. But then he begins to be a full-time player on this offense. First game as a full-time player on the offense, he gets 29 fantasy points, half PPR scoring here, 10 fantasy points the next week, 6 fantasy points the next week. Then he comes back with 15, 13, 13 over the last 3 weeks. So over 10, all but one game with Kansas City. You like that, half PPR over 10. So that's kind of the mark there. It's been very good. Very good, not very great, just very good and steady with DeAndre, so I feel comfortable with him. Cleveland is a top 10 matchup for wide receivers on the season as well, and on top of that, they just suffered several significant injuries to important players on that defense, in that secondary that has already struggled this season fantasy-wise, so the door just opened up a little bit wider for DeAndre to maybe even have one of those 20-point weeks, possibly. DK Metcalf after that is my wide receiver 25, followed by Zay Flowers, DJ Moore, Jordan Addison, Khalil Shakir, Darnell Mooney, Jakobi Meyers, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jameson Williams, and Jaden Reed. You might notice I'm a little bit lower than the experts on Zay Flowers. I kind of have been a lot of the season. I almost want to make him a fade because of that, except for the fact that he's playing against the New York Giants defense, which has been absolutely leaky as of the last several weeks. They went from being like an okay, solid-ish team to really not caring, and now they're just have been a terrible team. Easy to move against them these days on defense, so I couldn't quite get myself to fade Zay Flowers. That didn't feel right, but I am a little bit lower on him. He has been very, very up and down, inconsistent. I prefer consistent guys. I don't like guys who might actually lose me the week to be in my lineup if I can avoid it. So that's why I tend to be a little bit lower on some of these types of guys like Zay Flowers. We got DJ Moore going up against Minnesota. It's a good matchup. Jordan Addison going up against Chicago. Well, he's been great as of late, so it's hard to be too afraid. Chicago's defense also just got chewed out last week. It's been a good defense on the season, but they might be getting a little bit tired of especially in the first half, that offense, and maybe they start to be a little bit leakier. Khalil Shakir comes through last week, even through all of my concerns for him in that matchup. Thought the concerns made sense, but hey, he comes through, and that's why I've never said a bad thing about Khalil Shakir, just that I was concerned about him due to the matchup last week. This week against Detroit, I think we're looking at another week where I like the floor for him. I still don't love the ceiling, neither do the projections, because you need that touchdown, and it's not like Khalil Shakir's been a touchdown machine on the season. Darnell Mooney against Las Vegas, look for him to potentially return to form in that matchup. Jakobi Meyers going up against Atlanta. Here's my first fade of the week. Hopefully my cat does not mess up the sound here behind me. So Jakobi Meyers might be a change at quarterback. It's looking like it's probably going to be Desmond Ridder. Probably not AOC. We'll see. There is apparently a chance that it's AOC. We would like that for fantasy purposes. Assuming it's Desmond Ridder, I think that you have to think strongly about sitting Jakobi despite the excellent matchup versus Atlanta. If this was at all a bad matchup, he wouldn't be touching this kind of ranking. And he's definitely a candidate to get lower. Sometimes I just need to sit on these, marinate on it. And I'm going to have to look a little bit into what Desmond Ridder was able to do in Atlanta. Was he ever able to get somebody some sort of fantasy points? I need a reminder, but I know it wasn't pretty. Then we've got Devonta Smith, Pittsburgh. Not loving that situation, but he without Dallas Goedert, he just gets a little bit more use. Things are a little bit more. He's a little bit more trustworthy in those situations. Jalen Waddle, really hard to trust this situation, but it is Houston again this week, so have him a little bit higher than what he's done on the season, produced, in hopes that we can get something again from him. Unfortunately, he's going to be one of those guys that looks like, for me this year, that I drafted with high hopes, and every time he has gone off, he's been on my bench. Every time that I did play him, he's done terrible. Just going to be one of those guys. So this week, we're leaning towards playing him. Hopefully, he doesn't continue that trend. Marvin Harrison Jr. going up against New England. It's a nice matchup. This is about where he deserves to be ranked, if not even lower, based on what he's done this season. Jameson Williams is my second fade of the week going up against Buffalo. I hinted at this. Buffalo plays that shell, encourages teams to strike underneath, take what they can get instead of attacking against that shell. And most of the season, against most teams, against most players, that has worked to the detriment of a guy like Jameson Williams making a big play, getting a touchdown as well on top of that. Not the most likely scenario, so yeah, I'm kind of fading Jameson Williams this week. I'm not super excited about him against Buffalo, even with what happened last week. But it can happen, and that's why I don't want to get too low on Jameson Williams. He is in this Detroit offense, one of the best in the league, and they do a good job of, you got to help against that run. That could help break that shell a little bit. And also, we just saw last week, Kupp went 5 for 92 with a touchdown last week alone, and that was with a higher ADOT, attacking downfield, trying to keep that defense, I think, honest, so that way the rushing attack could also do its thing last week. Then we've got Jayden Reed, my third and final fade of the week. Last player we're going to cover in this video. Going up against Seattle. Seattle's defense has really found itself during the back half of the season, to the surprise of not too many people if you pay attention to the league and you know who that defensive coordinator is. And the most exciting player on that defense, Devin Witherspoon, I assume will find himself responsible in the game plan for the job of ensuring that Jayden Reed is not the reason that the Packers win this game. He's going to be kind of the Jayden Reed spy, quite potentially. Not every play or anything like that, I'm sure. They do more than that, but I would think that it's going to be tough sledding for Jayden Reed, a guy who, as you can see with the projections, he's very boom or bust, and the boom has been fantastic when it happens, but the lower end, the bust, has also been quite devastating when that has happened. The ECR experts have him ranked 30th. I think that's a little too aggressive on him based on what I'm seeing. You can see like how the projections work out, and not really liking this matchup right now against Seattle. All right, so players, four guys we are not currently ranked, and that does obviously have impacts on things. Cedric Tillman could come back from his concussion. He's been out for 2 weeks already. That's never great, but at some point, a lot of times these guys do come back. Josh Downs, I think, probably leans towards the doubtful side. That's why I didn't end up ranking him, nor are the experts at this point in time. Not in the Grace matchup against Denver, but that would impact the other Indianapolis receivers' projections a little bit. Chris Olave could come back this week with what happened with Derek Carr. If Derek Carr is not coming back, I got to imagine Chris Olave is not going to come back in that situation. So we'll see on that. Either way, he's still, I don't know, we haven't really heard anything about the potential of him coming back this week, despite the fact that he could. So we'll see. And then George Pickens, from the head coach himself here on Tuesday, pretty much said doubtful. Out is what his verbiage was. So that is it for the wide receivers. Once again, you can see the rest of the rankings up on the website. Links down in the description. Thank you so very much. Running backs later on today, and take care.